Bread is a source of sustenance in most countries, gluten-free for some of us, of course. The concept of breaking bread has been part of our collective culture, ethnically, religiously, spiritually, and symbolizes peacemaking, community, conversation, sharing, and often much more. Originally, the passing along of bread starters, fermented dough bakers with flour and water, also known as mother dough or sponge, literally kept the makings of the bread alive, meaning that a single starter could yield millions of loaves of bread. Of course, this was prior to the fast-acting yeast available today. With COVID-19, initially yeast was hard to come by in the groceries. In fact, I had to order mine online, just as everyone else was hunkering down and wondering how they would manage the pandemic without the convenience of the store shelves being stocked with things we take for granted. We took to our own kitchens and went back to some of those early traditions, baking bread for our loved ones. Bread, colloquially, is also known as money, another link to sustenance, sustainability. You can see how important bread is, and particularly for individuals yearning to be independent wage earners and entrepreneurs without the benefits, conveniences, or accessibility to the means. Cape Flats or townships in the area surrounding Cape Town in South Africa is one of those areas. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, a podcast featuring interviews with nonprofit and social impact organizations under $10 million. My name is Laura Witkoff, and I'm excited and proud to be your host. My hope is that you love the stories as much as we do, and perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, invest in, or donate. Feel free to pass along any valuable information you hear today to others, and remember to send me the name of any organization you'd like featured at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com. South Africa is a divided country between rich and poor, and further divided by their bread heritage due to the history of government-subsidized bread of the apartheid era. Bread companies continue to dominate, with very little creativity coming from the baking community. 1 in 3 people bake in South Africa, but very few economize their baking, leaving very little healthy bread sold on the ground by the people for the people. In many countries around the world, the informal baking trade makes up nearly 50% of the sector, whereas in South Africa, it's less than 5%. Jeremy Barty, founder and curator of Bread Rev, is changing all of that. Bread Rev is committed to helping people bake beautiful, healthy bread and supporting commercializing it as a way of bringing balance to the baking industry in South Africa. Their tagline is, "Bake it, build it, learn it." And their 3 Bread Revs are Bread Reverence, Bread Revolution, and Bread Revival. I am so excited to learn more and welcome my guest today, founder and curator of Bread Rev, Jeremy Barty. So let's get started. Welcome, Jeremy. What a wonderful and interesting podcast I think we have today. You're not a nonprofit, but you are absolutely a social enterprise and making a huge impact in the community surrounding South Africa, the flats and the townships. So please share your passion for bread and how you came to begin to do this for the surrounding communities who need it.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It was really great listening to you. Great intro just to hear that. I think that bread is, well, as you've mentioned, it's very intrinsic. And I come from a family of food. So we've had restaurants in our family and we have cookery schools and our mothers have taught at cordon bleu. I latched on to baking passionately at a very young age. And so I suppose that's where it comes from. So I've baked most of my life. And although I do have other vocation, I work in change as a consultant, bread has become sort of that thing that I can try and use to help people come together. Like you mentioned, the divide between rich and poor. I mean, South Africa is very diverse and has a huge divide. And it's very obvious. So, I think the story maybe starts with me wanting to help as part of being a South African. I was brought up in apartheid, which was sort of a legislated segregation, and wanting to try and help with that. And how could I do that?
Coming from the world of organizational change or being a consultant, you really merge those two loves that you have. One is that you can see the future and you want people to sort of get on board and think about what is their future and making it possible. And the other is your love for cooking or specifically baking. You latched on to that and really wanted to merge those two interests. I think it's quite a story. And then on top of that, having input from the folks who are bakers in those communities who want to be self-sustaining. And so I'd love for you to take us back a little bit of 5 years. I've seen a little bit online through some of the videos of the first oven, which I loved because it was a coffee container. I just loved it.
It really started with a desire to go and try and bake with ordinary folk. Right in the beginning, and I thought, okay, well, how will I do that? And I thought, well, I could just get an oven and we could put it on a trailer. And I started exploring and chatting to various people. And I met this one pastor who had what we call a shack church. He gave me permission. He said, you can, anytime you want to come in the week, the shack is empty, you can come and experiment. And he said, if you arrive, people will come. So we kind of started out in this place called Inkaneni, which means taken by force in English. So it's like one of those places where no one's got anywhere to stay. So they sort of set up their shacks informally. And I was kind of looking, I wanted to start in maybe the poorest area. And then very quickly realized, like, wow, we can't bake the way we wanted to bake. So like, how do we bake? Well, we need to find ovens to bake. And so we started that oven journey with literally thinking, okay, well, we saw rocket ovens, we saw some of the technology. We can bake in that and we can move them around. We can put them on a trailer, take them out to Nkaneni, get people baking. I mean, the bread looked terrible in the beginning. But we also try to use healthy flour. So that was a very big differentiator for us. There's only one organic farm in the entire country, and that's very far away. So we can only get biologically grown is the best we can get. So we connected with a farmer and got that in. And so people were starting to realize it was healthy. And we'd just go out there and with basins, plastic basins and scrapers, cloths, and we would just mix doughs and talk to people and bake some bread. And I mean, people would come because it also meant they got food, so at the end we would let them take what they baked. We realized the ovens were too small and we had to build bigger ovens. We started to build ovens inside of one of the prisons in Cape Town, had a workshop, and we started building ovens in there. But some of the time we just built them in my backyard or wherever. And then we started finding people in the townships to build them, welders and people like that. And so the ovens sort of became a backbone behind the way to bake, because otherwise we couldn't bake. And so we just started project by project, one at a time. And it has actually expanded outside of Cape Town. So we have ovens around Johannesburg now. We have some in the Eastern Cape, so in South Africa, a lot of what we would call the Cape Flats is occupied by people that have a homeland, which would be like the Eastern Cape. Their tribal villages are in the Eastern Cape. It's not always easy. The Cape Flats, as we talk about it, I mean, has massive violence problems. One of our original projects was up and running and going really well, and then the next minute, for political reasons, the woman got beaten up and thrown out of their bakery, and the gates got locked. So, and I suppose it also makes it worse because I can be seen as some sort of, coming in like a savior or something. And so you have to get past all of that. You have to build trust. It's very difficult. So you have all of these social, political, so it's not just as simple as getting people to bake. So it's really tricky. There's a beautiful poem called The Crazy Ones. I don't know if you know about it, but it talks about the people that really think they can change things, and they have to be a little bit crazy.
So you fit into that category, one of the crazy ones, but one of the good crazy ones.
People started to hear about us and would order like 5 or 6 ovens from us. People started baking communally, so they would have the ovens and people could make their own doughs, come to the oven and bake bread. And so that's how we've really gone. It's been quite interesting, met lots of different people from all walks of life. And I think currently at the moment, the bigger bakeries we have, there's probably a handful of them on the Cape Flats that are running. And then a host of smaller ovens, like with gardeners who use some of what they grow to make flatbreads and things like that. And so it's quite informal. It's not as structured or as organized, purely because that's the way we've chosen to be. We did have 1 or 2 bakeries. So out of this, we started doing a bakery using these ovens, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we handed that over to an NGO, 200 square meter building. It has 6 staff, 2 big rocket ovens, and it's a wholesale bakery, and it supplies, and it has a big training facility. So we do have that more formal advancement, but we've actually found ourselves more recently going back to almost the grassroots, like how do you bake a loaf of bread when you don't have an oven? So we have things like rooster cook, which is bread that you make on a grid, which is a piece of mesh. Because I think what we want to do is we want to find something that lights social change.
I think your trajectory is so interesting in so many ways. You literally started in a gathering place to bake and break bread together with the community to satisfy their hunger, maybe their interest or their curiosity or their ability to sustain themselves economically. It's been such a long, horrific cultural, social, and political relationship of oppression. The whole idea of trust with your neighbor, trust with you, trust with if they can get ahead, can I be part of that?
So like even if you just take today as an example, I met with 2 people because today was a Bread Rev day. The first area, Q-Town, has a 50% unemployment rate, and there's a church that wants to do something there. And the pastor was saying, well, I can just walk out and I can find ex-convicts within a block and we could start with them. When you got 50% unemployment rate, if you've been in jail, the chance of you getting work is like next to zero. To stay out of our prison system is just nearly impossible. Most offenders will go back. So how do you engage with, and he said this, he said it took him 10 years to build trust. He was there for 10 years before the community saw that he didn't have an agenda. They want to know what your agenda is because everyone has an agenda. So it's a different way of living and quite violent. Like my oven builder, the guy who I build ovens with at the moment, when I go to fetch him, he always says, well, when you arrive, just look at the field, because if there are people running in the field, turn around and drive away, because there's 2 sets of flats. So you have the one gang will come over and raid them and the other. And the gangsters are really not bad people, funnily enough. You know, you can often have a very terrifying image of them. Believe me, if you challenge them, you'll be in trouble. But around a fire, or if they're mixing a dough, we got them baking and selling, you know. Really nice guys, you know, maybe 17, 18-year-old guys. Although it's terrifying in some ways, in other ways, people love to engage with bread. And everyone loves to mix a dough. So I think what we do is we generally arrive, and as quickly as we can, we get everyone mixing a dough. And that kind of gets the conversations going. And we talk about how one can economize it, how you scale it, and that sort of stuff.
So you provide a lot, actually, of education so that maybe folks will take this on as their own. So not only will they buy into it, but they will and participate, but they will take it on as their own. The story that you told about the gang members joining in, and really there is a level of engagement. What is the likelihood that they could create gang bread?
In a suburb that's more affluent, there's a coffee shop called Gangstar. It's ex-gangsters, ex-cons that serve you coffee and bread and stuff. I mean, I think South Africa's actually got quite a lot of NGOs really trying to help. I think like some projects can take a long time, and a lot of them fail, and then or they change shape. If the oven doesn't work over here, the oven moves and it's got to go and work over there. I suppose in a way, one of the reasons why we're not an NGO in the sense is that ours is quite risky, and a lot of the businesses that would give funds wouldn't give funds for a project like ours. So a lot of our money has come for very specific projects because people have seen it and said, okay, we want to support you in that project.
And yet the results that you're getting are quite remarkable. And I have to ask you this question as a business consultant. Do you feel that you are learning from Bread Rev?
It's very different. It's culturally very different. It's almost like they're 2 worlds. How people work together in a business and how people work together in, say, in Kaneni is very different. There's a lot more sharing, actually, because if you have, you share, because there'll be a day when you don't have. We're quite a religious country, so there's a lot of churches. So a lot of people that are hungry go to feeding schemes. I mean, if we didn't have the feeding schemes or the social grants in this country, I think we'd be in real big trouble.
And those are like food banks in the United States, I assume, right?
It's more just like a church that we have hundreds of churches. And so it'll be a church that has literally gets some vegetables from somewhere, some, grains or whatever, puts it in a big pot and serves soup. Even today we were looking at, we can feed kids at school with this particular kind of bread which we make, which is, it's a whole grain, what we would call a seed loaf. But you can have 2 slices of that and it doesn't give you a sugar spike. It keeps you consistent throughout the day, which is a massive problem in the townships, because most of the kids go to school, if they're lucky, they'll get what's 50 cents. It's like a packet of chips, a little tiny packet of really bad for you chips, and I think maybe a Kool-Aid, which is like a powdered drink.
The nutritional aspect that you bring up is so key. I did a little bit of work in Uganda, and one of the things that was so important there basically was around HIV and kids who were orphaned who couldn't even get to school. It was doing a breakfast program and putting vitamins in a porridge. What you're suggesting, and I think it's so great, is kids who have a piece of this grained bread that has nutrition in it can sustain them so that they can actually learn in school.
Yeah, I mean, that's the crazy part about it. That's the hope. The hope is that if we do get enough people baking and they do bake really healthy bread, it economizes them, first of all, but it also brings health. In the more affluent areas, places, you can get your healthy food, but it costs. And it costs more than normal food. So if you want a free-range chicken, it costs more. Poor people don't have that option. So what is it that they can have that gives them some level of health? Farmers are also everything's getting squeezed, So the flour companies, the millers, own the bakeries that bake the government bread, it's not government bread anymore. And so it's like they've got the whole segment and they squeeze the farmers. There are some farmers that have broken out. There are 3 of them in the Western Cape, and they are definitely viable and working and growing. And that's really positive, because it means that farmers can have an option not to get, I don't know, whatever they pay, 3,000 Rand a ton for their grain. They can get a bit more if they grow it and consider the soil, for example. I don't know about America, but in South Africa, you can really start to see the chemicals starting to affect people's health here, like significantly.
Absolutely.
Whereas maybe when we started 5 years ago, people wouldn't even listen in a way. Whereas today they say, no, but there's a need for healthy bread. You can't keep eating that bread. And they go, yes, we know. So there is that acknowledgement now that you can't eat this really cheap aerated bread and it's not good for you at all. What we do is we call it enlightened self-interest. And what that is a way of protecting yourself from any outcome. So what we do is we go in and we do what we do because we want to do it. And we don't look to any outcome. We don't say we're coming in to change people, whereas in the corporate work, you've got a very strict agenda and outcomes. Here, you can't really work like that. You've got to do it because you want to do it and not what you're going to get out of it. It's maybe not enlightened self-interest, but it's more, that's what we call it, but it's protecting yourself from, the incessant need, because you always have people around you that need things, that have absolutely nothing, that'll ask you for things all the time. And just to try and let them know that you're just on a level playing field, which is quite hard as a white male going into, which is predominantly black. I mean, still segregated in Cape Town, Johannesburg. There's been a lot of transformation, but in Cape Town, not as much. I mean, I do it because I want to do it, and sometimes it does get you down. You got to guard against hopelessness, but yeah.
You've only been in operation for 5 years, you said, right? So first of all, I just want to commend you for going down this road. Of course, you are perceived as privileged because you are, just by the color of your skin. That's a given, and I get that. And so the expectation that people will want more because you can give more in their eyes is a given. I also want to just push back a tiny little bit and readjust. I would imagine it's a successful day if the outcome is that you have edible bread. Like, it's just readjusting, right? Because that's a first step to trust. And that in and of itself is an outcome. I want to go back to rocket ovens because I think my listeners would be so curious, if they're not in the field of baking, what that is. And was your first one built with a coffee can? It looked like a coffee can.
So rocket technology, believe it or not, is an ancient African technology. And so it was originally just built out of clay. And because you didn't have a lot of wood, and certainly the semi-desert regions and that, their wood had to last longer, and they'd figured out the rocket. And so I'd watched a permaculture video from America where I saw they'd made these rocket barrel ovens. And I thought, wow. And then I realized that we had this rocket technology because as a consultant, I was also working in Botswana and around, and I'd seen some of the, and so I thought, wow, what if we could, build a barrel oven? And so then I thought, no, well, let's start small with a coffee can. And so there was a local artisan bakery that had those cans, and we built a one-loaf oven. And there's a video of it, I think, somewhere, of this first one-loaf oven. It was really great. So the rocket technology, the main advantage is that you don't use a lot of wood. And then also what we did is we slightly adjusted the barrel or oven. We went into the bigger ovens. We allowed the air to flow around the baking chamber and seal it. It also meant that we could use any wood, any form of combustion, because there's wood just often lying everywhere, half rotten and stuff, and builders leftover wood, and often the shacks rot and they have to replace wood. So Tembile in Gugulethu, he's known for using wood from broken shacks. I don't know if you saw that video when we were visited by Paul Hollywood, who's a famous global baker, and Tembile's on that. So the rocket oven it's really amazing because depending on how you build the rocket and what size you build it, one small bag of wood gets you a really long way. So the progression, but definitely, if you look at, running water, first of all, most of the shacks don't have running water. You can't just turn on a tap. And then electricity. You don't have electricity, or it's illegal, or if it's not illegal and that's dangerous, it's expensive. And if you have a domestic kind of oven, you turn that on. So the baking, and when I say 1 in 3 people bake, it's mainly they'll bake a muffin or a cake or something like that. It's not bread. If you go to India or Mozambique or up Africa, where there wasn't apartheid, you can see there's bread culture there, and there's, you have your little bread shops, whereas we just don't. And so I suppose we're the crazy ones. We want that to happen, and we'll keep prodding, and hopefully it'll happen. We are a kind of a first, third world type country. So that's, if you come to Cape Town, is incredibly beautiful. Don't know if you've ever been here, but it's probably one of the best cities in the world from a beauty perspective on a beautiful day. We have a healthy tourist trade here because of that. And, we've got a lot of international people that own houses here around. There's some extremely affluent areas where you'd pay $8 million for a house. It's this dichotomy of where, as you travel out, you can go from a very affluent suburb, and then you go into the medium suburbs, and then you go into the poor suburbs. And so I suppose from a bread perspective, for example, we have a loaf that we sell for 30 Rand in the suburb, in what we would call the suburbs. And that same loaf, which is a ciabatta loaf, we put in a tin and it sells for 12 Rand because it couldn't sell for more. So the whole economics of bread is also very tricky. There's good champions, like Tembile and Jerome. These are guys that have taken this on and are trying to make a living and surviving, and they're the pioneers.
Is there any possibility, this is sort of a stretch, I'm sure, for the government to partner with you in some way?
There is that possibility. The government does support projects if and where it can. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of corruption more recently, so that's been really difficult. But there is, I think that there are good people in the government, and they are trying under the circumstances. There's this potential to get kits And that's what we're going to look to sponsor, which is, so how that would work is you come, what we call a baking day, you just hang out and you bake, and then you're inspired. And then you can go to what we call an oven building day, where you would build ovens. And then what happens is you can then go to an existing backyard baker and you can hang with them. And if you get to a point where you are proficient, you can get a kit. And you can have it in your backyard, and everyone comes and sets you up. The only responsibility you have is that you then have to allow other people and train them up. It's getting traction. We've got lots of interest, and that's what you've got to look for, because it's not about what I think is the right idea. It's about what's got traction. So that's getting traction, and we have got some people supporting us, and we've got meetings, and people are coming to bake, and we're going. So that's that's the beginnings of something that for me is quite exciting, because it's that kind of thing that can really drive social change.
So you really are onto something, I think. So it's a great, great model.
Yeah, it's to hold the relationship. I mean, I think it takes a long time. You know, in the beginning, you could go in and you can give too much, and you learn that how you give is really important. Well, I think I'm still learning how to give properly. I don't know if you ever get to the bottom, but you learn to see the right kind of relationship develop, and it has to be like that. And that's often hard because you feel compassion for these people that, I mean, sometimes it's extremely dire, and, you know, in poor communities, things don't work easily.
Relationships, my guess, that are more successful have a level of reciprocity. And what I mean by that is not someone gives back to you personally, but someone gives back to the idea of helping others in general, that it's not just an individual, but it really becomes a community effort. And so you're looking for those relationships of reciprocity. When you have accountability and reciprocity, you want to do well. You have buy-in. You want to participate. You want to grow. So I feel like you've created a model that is sustainable based on that, or it sounds that way. And yes, it doesn't mean it's not hard. You've had your disappointments. I'm sure there's been disappointments on the other end of the receiver. It takes a long time to change culture, which is in fact what you're doing. And not only the culture of the flats, but the culture of the wealthier.
The real biggest challenge is about trying to build, like you say, those relationships that I suppose in some ways I can't go and be there. Although the other people in Bread Rev, like, they live in those areas, so they are there. Yeah, it's great, and I hope I'm not. I mean, I've been to America a couple of times, and I suppose as coming from an outsider, the American people that I've met generally are fairly confident, and I think when you go into a township, what you realize is that there's a general lack of confidence and hope in some ways. Just getting someone to almost bake a loaf of bread and go like, "Oh, I made that," is actually massive. So in that sense, it is great. And like you say, we do have hope for this project. As long as I've been going, you just keep 5 years.
I agree that when somebody sees success in a discrete, immediate way, like baking bread or going through the process of building an oven and then going through the exercise of learning, is magnificent, because they've already crossed over to the "I can't do this" to "I did it." And then what's next? And so building those steps is quite incredible. And so as many roadblocks as you've experienced, I love that you're still here doing this, one foot in front of the other, and looking for models and ways to scale it, which is exactly what you're doing. Is there a typical day for Bread Rev?
So it's had very different seasons. So at one stage we were in a warehouse, we were all building ovens and baking. And that was a season that we realized in the end wasn't sustainable, that the ovens needed to be built out there. So we moved. I mean, today it was a Bread Rev day. So going out to meet people that are leaders in the community as a start, to get permission or to say, could we try this? So that's kind of some of the days. That's the kind of work in a typical day. And then actually going out and baking. So we've been having quite a few of these backyard experiences, and I've been to someone else's backyard and they've come to mine. And We had a group of orphans that came. So what happens in this country is like when you hit 18, they just kick you, you out. And then you go like, and so there was this group of orphans that found somewhere to stay, and they came and baked, showed them how we could economize bread. So it's a lot around just getting together and baking. It's, like an NGO often would have a head office and staff and that. We like a motley crew. And I suppose also remember that I don't know if you can get away with this in America because it's very legislated in a way, there's protocols and procedures. This is Africa. You just pick up your stuff and you roll. From a health and safety perspective, I reckon we get into a lot of trouble.
The first time someone tastes the bread that they've baked, what is that experience like, or can you capture that for me?
There was this one lady who came to us who was going to retire. She was a domestic worker. And I remember, that was one time where I distinctly just remember her tasting the bread and like, she was just like, oh, wow. She'd always just lived off the pre-sliced packaged bread. But also the days in the sand where even though the bread didn't look that good, people had made it, it was hot and it was fresh and it disappears. And also little kids will come running and pieces get broken off and the bread just sort of scatters. So those were good moments, I think. There's something intrinsic about sharing something you've baked. As a human being, doesn't matter how much money you got, it gives you a sense of kind of that artisanal, creative sense. Well, I made this and I'm going to share it with you. The prisoners were also quite rewarding, getting to build ovens inside the prison with the prisoners. That was pretty good. And then maybe one highlight project, one company paid us to come and do a team build with them. And what we did was we went up and took the Polesmore ovens, the prison ovens, on a trailer, drove out to this sort of fairly remote school outside of Cape Town, trained all the people up the day before on how to bake bread. And then we went to the school and literally baked bread with the children for the whole day. And that was really hard work lugging the ovens and stuff, but that was pretty rewarding. So there've been some great highlights along the way of that kind of thing.
Small and Gutsy is sponsored by the Intrinsic Group, my boutique management consulting firm specializing in guiding organizations to leverage talent, optimize processes, and to ensure the organization's narrative is aligned with their culture. We'd love to invite you to be a sponsor. So if you're interested in sponsoring Small and Gutsy to keep it going, please reach out to me at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com. So I have a round of quick Gutsy questions as we come toward the end of the podcast. So share with me, what is at the top of your wish list for Bread Rev? But it can't be financing or money related. What's at the top of your wish list?
I'd call it the spark that lights the fire. In other words, even though we've been doing this for 5 years, we haven't seen social expansion away from the projects that we have done. In other words, I'd love to see a movement start to happen where in one area little bakeries start to pop up. And I think it's coming, but that would be my wish.
If you were to think of a song that describes Bread Rev, what would it be?
So we had a guy died recently, a South African musician called Johnny Clegg. I don't know if you've ever heard of Johnny Clegg, but he was what you would call a white Zulu. In other words, he was white, but he could speak Zulu, and he's a prolific song. He tells the story of the song where all the workers are singing about Friday. It's all about these guys working on this chicken farm, and they're talking about how Friday is going to come. It's a beautiful song. So I'd say something like that would epitomize Bread Rev, because it's got that African sort of spirit and that rhythm.
What makes Bread Rev gutsy?
We just take risks. We just do stuff. It's gutsy. I mean, some people think we're nuts, Our risk profile is a bit left of center. I mean, that's why I really love the name, the small, the small and gutsy. I thought that kind of even in a way names what we're doing.
Yeah, I think so too.
And more so not me, but those people in containers and garages and shacks that are getting up early to bake bread and sell it.
I love that you say that. And so as social and economic change hopefully continues, I want to dedicate this podcast to all the people who've gained the knowledge that you've given to them, and they're getting up early every morning in their backyards, in their garages, in their shacks, in their whatever, baking bread and selling it for the sustainability of themselves and growth and for better health. What is something that outsiders or maybe even a few insiders don't know about Bread Rev?
What came to mind is we are not oven builders. We have no idea. We just learned. I think that's the one thing, is that we definitely wing it when it comes to ovens.
If you could get one celebrity or influencer to endorse or talk about Bread Rev, to really kind of create that social change, that buzz, who might it be?
That's quite interesting. Well, I thought of Trevor Noah, purely because he's South African. Yeah. But I mean, I know he understands the South African side of it. Mm-hmm. He understands townships. So, if he talked about it and promoted it, that would be So Trevor Noah might be someone. Otherwise, being crazy, I would just love the bread companies in South Africa to. So in South Africa, you have to give 1% or a certain amount back into social upliftment. It's by law. And what happens is the bread companies go and like paint creches and do everything except take that money and put it back into like. So I mean, maybe if the managing director of one of the CEOs of the bread companies started promoting us and talking about us.
I love both of those ideas. We in the U.S., we have something called corporate social responsibility, where they get a tax credit if they're able to. But I love that idea because you're really trying to impact the economic and social environment in such a huge way, in such a positive way, and nutrition as well. So it would be really great if they did not only endorse it, but put some money behind it.
I'm kind of also, a hope, maybe an unrealistic hope, is that it happens right at grassroots without funding. In some ways, like by the people, for the people, so that they take up this health thing and they say, no, we're going to eat. And then I hope the government supports that structure, but it needs to come from those people.
When the people who are impacted by the change have a say in the change, it's an easier sell. And I think you're going about it exactly the right way because you're engaging folks in both nourishment, education, and the opportunity to sustain themselves. And so their input, buy-in, even though the educational piece is sort of laid out, the way they interpret it and do it is really based on how they want to do it, and you're going to support them. So I love that. There's real buy-in. It's not anything being done to them. It's an offering that they get to participate as an equal partner. Now, let my listeners know how they can find out about you. What's the best way to reach out and get to know who you are and what you're doing?
Breadrev.com is our website, www.breadrev.com. Jeremy at breadrev.com. You could mail me.
So I just want to thank you for spending so much time with me today. This was enlightening, interesting, engaging, beautiful example of social and economic change, social cultural change, and the economic opportunities that you are providing for your fellow countrymen in the flats and the townships of South Africa. It's beautiful and beyond, a bit beyond, as you've shared.
Thank you so much for making the time. I also appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, give us some stars and write a review on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts, or buy us a coffee. Buymeacoffee.com/small and gutsy. I want to thank my partners in this endeavor, my co-producer, sound engineer, and composer, the amazing Pavel Franson, my exceptionally talented graphic designer, Nate Addy, my social work intern extraordinaire, Stephanie Tran. Please check out their bios on the Intrinsic website and all the folks, friends, and family who have guided and inspired me. Our blog of these small and gutsy nonprofits and social impact organizations can be found in the organizational stories section of the Intrinsic Group website, so that we can continue to link clients, volunteers, future employees, investors, and donors to this small but mighty network. Of course, we can't take responsibility outside of our own vetting of the organizations we interview, so before you sign on to support or work for them, we encourage you to do your own due diligence and research them as well. We just want you to learn about the small and gutsy nonprofit and social impact organizational sector so they can spread their story and their impactful work. From small and gutsy to big with impact, I'm Laura Witkoff, and thanks for listening.